Hello everyone and welcome to what is probably the most impressive game that was played yesterday in the Chessable Masters Grand Final between Alireza, Firouzja and Magnus Carlsen, although it was Magnus who had the white pieces. And well, they said that up to for the first 40 moves, players played at an engine like precision. Now I don't really like those terms because well, let's say 20-30 years from now you're gonna have a really strong engine, and you ask that engine how precise this game was, it will say it was maybe the playing strength of your average chess playing uncle. But as these are the best we have nowadays, then they rate it very high. I'm only guessing, but I'm pretty sure that's how it's gonna go. So, while I don't like throwing around those percentages, while having a 99.1 or 99.3 percentage of an engine-like game, it means you've played very well. So let's check it out and let's see what happens at move 41 once all of these moves are played. So Magnus has the white pieces and he opens with pawn to g3. We have pawn to d5, attacking the center, while white develops on the flank, a very hyper-modern way to develop. Knight f3, g6, and bishop to g2. We have bishop to g7, d4, and now knight to f6. We have pawn to c4 and pawn to c6 through a bit of a different move order. We've reached the King's Indian defense. We have castles, and now transposing into the Neo-Gruenfeld, c3, d captures on c4, and now pawn to e4. And it's a pretty standard stuff. Black will play b5 and b4, and white wants to get e5 in. But usually you will sacrifice the pawn on d5 temporarily to prevent e5 and knight to d5. But you'll see what happens. Pawn to b5, we have queen to e2, and now pawn to a5, preparing pawn to b4. Rook to d1 by Magnus, and now knight b to d7. And here, pawn to d5. Now, like I've mentioned, if you play pawn to e5 first, then you give black this wonderful d5 square, and then you fix black's pawn structure, and it's nothing, nothing great for white. So instead, you sacrifice a pawn temporarily, and now after c captures on d5, now you play pawn to e5. Of course, you want the knight to move and to capture on d5, but b4. Of course, Alireza will not move his knight, and now e captures on f6, knight captures on f6, and now knight to b5, and it is now as of move 14 that we have a completely new game. Now, it's a piece sacrifice, but the knight on b5 will not be able to survive forever, as you'll see in the game. Also, there is one game where knight to a4 was played. It was played last year between Max Warmerdam and Bhaskar Nadiban in the FIDE Grand Swiss, and Warmerdam won with knight to a4 with the white pieces. But also, I want to show you what happens if you go back with the knight. Let's say you try to keep your piece, and you just want to say, okay, I'm gonna defend, and I'm gonna be just gonna be up an extra piece. Then black has this e5 move, and now once the pawns start marching forward, it's gonna be impossible to defend this. Or you capture on e5, then rook e8, and it's really hard to find moves here for white, like bishop to f4, bishop to g4 comes, attacks the queen, and now you can play bishop to f3. But once everything gets traded off, let's say knight to d7, you put more pressure on the e file. Bishop captures, knight captures on e5, bishop captures, the rook now x-raying the white queen, so you have to move it. Queen to f6, putting pressure on b2, and this knight really, I mean, it's an extra piece, but it really is an extra piece. Like it's should be gone. Let's say bishop captures. You have, I mean, two passed pawns. One more will probably be created. The rook is coming down the board. It's not right at the moment because the bishop is on g4, but it's an overwhelming position to defend. So instead, after knight captures on f6, knight to b5 is played. And okay, let's see how Alireza deals with this. Bishop d7, he attacks Magnus's knight, pawn to a4. Defends the knight, and he captures, and now pawn to e6, defends the d5 pawn, and he now has this beautiful pawn chain consisting of 8 pawns, where Magnus has only 5 pawns. So 3 pawns for the piece. Also, the b pawns are doubled, so yeah, it's definitely a trade-off, to say the least. We have knight to d4. Magnus wants to go to c6 to eliminate the b4 pawn if Alireza starts advancing too early, and he does. He plays pawn to a4, which is in fact very strong. Knight to c6 attacks the queen. Queen to b6, knight captures, queen captures, and now bishop to d2. So, okay, it's a little bit easier to breathe. You've eliminated one of these pawns, and you will put a bishop on c3 to counter Alireza's strong dragon on g7. Knight to d7, threatening bishop captures on b2, and bishop to c3. And okay, the bishop is very strong here, but it is a bit overworked, you know, defending the knight here and the pawn on b2. So here, knight to c5, and now pawn to h4. Magnus goes after the black king, and while you could move the knight to c2 to try and keep the knight, again, like I said, like captures the bishop b captures bishop and queen b2, the a pawn marches forward, the knight comes to b3 or d3. It's just impossible to defend this with white. So instead, after knight to c5, pawn to h4, and now knight to b3, and bishop captures on g7. You could also play rook to a2, but it's impossible to actually capture on a1, so that's why bishop captures on g7 first. And the reason is it's impossible is that because after you capture, you bring the bishop back. You defend the knight, and the knight is still hanging. And if you try to save the knight, queen e5, and it's game over. There's no way to defend. If you play, you can't even play d4 because the queen on b5 would hang. So if f6, you're going to capture here, and if king g7, rook captures on d5, attacks the queen, rook to d7, and it's you know, a very short king hunt that will end successfully. So after bishop captures on g7, king captures on g7, and now queen to e5 with check. Again, knight c2, you could try and save the knight, but it's not gonna really work. You're gonna take the rook, and once rook captures, queen captures on b2, and now you have to deal with all of these extra, you know, passed pawns. So instead, queen to e5 check right away. We have pawn to f6 defending, and now queen captures on e6, and finally, Alireza eliminates the extra piece. So queen captures on b4, rook captures on d5. Now Magnus going for the king hunt, and now rook to a7. Again, very, very important move, because if you capture the rook here now, then comes rook d7 check, and after king to h8, all the other moves are, you know, if you go here, then it's just a very brief king hunt, and if you go here, then bishop captures on a8, and it's a terrible position for black. If you capture, then just queen f7, it's impossible to defend, and if you try to push, let's say you create a passed pawn and, you know, try to do something, then bishop to d5, and after c3, rook f7. A threatening queen captures on f6, and once you trade here, now you're threatening checkmate here, and you're either getting checkmated here, or you defend that checkmate, and then it's checkmate via the f6 square. The bishop covers g7. So that's why knight captures on a1 is impossible. Rook to a7 was played, again, absolutely the strongest engine move. Rook 8 to d1, now preparing rook d7 check, and rook to e7, attacking the queen, but still rook d7. Rook f to f7, putting pressure on the rook here, and now rook captures on e7. We have rook captures on e7, the queen, of course, defending the rook, and rook to d7, again forcing the trade here. Rook captures, queen captures with check, king h6, and bishop to d5 now. Now, this is a good idea, especially with, well, not a little time on the clock. They're both still above 3 minutes on the clock, but it's an attempt at a win. If you didn't want to do that, you'd probably go for something like queen to d8 and try to harass the black king from behind. But he played bishop to d5, the idea being that this pawn covers the g5 square, and if you can get your bishop, let's say here, then queen to h7 is checkmate. Also, you're putting pressure on this diagonal, which could be very relevant. But Alireza plays queen to e1 with check, and after king to g2, knight to d2. This knight to d2 move is the only way for him to play, but it is the one that stops the nasty idea of just getting checkmated, because if you go for it now, then it's just queen to f1 check, king h2, and knight to f3 checkmate. So Magnus has to figure out how to defend this, and he does with the only move, queen to a7, defends the pawn on f2, and now queen to e5. Trying to bait Magnus to go for queen to e3 check, but queen to e3 check would lose him the game. Yes, it's a very nice queen trade, but after everything gets traded off, look at this, a3. And now you don't have a way of dealing with this, because if b captures, you're gonna play pawn to c3, and now the knight covers both b3 and e4. The bishop cannot use those squares to defend c2, and once the pawn touches c2, of course c1 is a dark square. The light square bishop is absolutely useless there. So that's why queen to c5 is played, and now we have king to g7. Magnus goes back. We have queen to a5 now, attacking the knight, and pawn to a3. a very nice sacrifice, because if you capture the knight here, then comes a captures on b2 with the threat of b1 queen, and after queen to d1, stopping that, you can just give up the queen, and well, your newly promoted queen, and after let's say queen captures on d5 with check, king g1, c3, and now the pawn will of course win you the game. You can play it something like queen to e1, but it doesn't matter. Queen to c6, you want to push the pawn. If you give one check, the king is very safe on g8. Queen to d8 with check, you're going to play king to f7. Now no more checks, and you have to go back. Now c2, queen to c1, and queen to e4. You will go after the d1 check to trade off queens. If there's nothing to do here. Even if you could somehow get the king to f1, then queen to h1 would pick up the queen, so it's useless. But after a3, b captures on a3 was played, and now pawn to c3, queen to a7 with a nice check, king to h6, and now queen to now queen to c5. But here comes pawn to c2. Of course, you cannot capture it. The bishop would hang while defending the knight, and here we have queen to f8 with check. King to h5, reaching move 40, and up until this point, both of them have played with engine-like precision. But now there is only one move that allows Magnus to continue the game, so feel free to pause the video for the first time and try to find the only move that doesn't lose the game for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this brilliant idea. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is pawn to g4 with check. And the reason for this is that it doesn't matter which pawn you capture. If you capture the pawn on h4, then it's queen to h6 with check, and once the king moves, you just pick up the knight. You pick up the knight, you defend the bishop, and you control the queening square. And if after g4 check, the king captures on g4, then it's the other way around. Queen to b4 check, again connects with the knight. King, or if queen to f4, blocking check, trying to trade off queens and then promote the c-pawn, you play f3 with check. And now once the king moves to h5, now you'll pick up the queen on f4, and black will get another queen into the game, but this will be a repetition either by queen f4 check, and now you go here and it's a repetition, or king to g7, and then okay, the game continues, but still objectively a draw. However, after this king to h5 move, Magnus did not find pawn to g4. He was down to 30 seconds on the clock. Alireza was below 20 seconds on the clock, but Magnus played queen to f7. He wanted to just play queen captures on h7, but now Alireza has a winning idea, so feel free to pause the video and win the game for Alireza while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on punishing the first non-engine move of the game, and for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is pawn to h6. And now you see the horror of what you have done. Now g4 check doesn't do anything. The queen is no longer on f8 to be able to come to h6. Now g4, king captures on h4, and there's no continuation here. There's absolutely nothing you can do here. So instead, after this h6 move, queen to d7 was played by Magnus, but also he lost on time here. But it doesn't matter. Even if he didn't lose on time, there is no move. Yeah, Magnus actually played the top engine move. The engine gives in this losing position, but still, there's nothing to be done. You just bring a queen into the game, and this one check, king captures on h4. There's no continuation here. All of the, I mean, the king is on a dark square, the queen, the bishop, nothing can touch the black king on h4, and there's just no good way to continue. Black has two queens. It's gonna be a very quick checkmate. So yeah, brilliant stuff by both of them. Not easy to play, a rapid chess with such engine-like precision. Even though, okay, they both really knew the opening well, and of course they know the ins and outs, how to play the position after the opening. But it's still, there was so much to calculate here, and it's just incredibly impressive that they were able to do so. But yeah, Alireza took Magnus down in the first one. He took him down in the second one. Again, Magnus got a bad position. And I think he also almost either lost on time or had a really bad position, so he resigned. Then he won the third game and then agreed to a draw in the fourth. In the previous video, I accidentally misinformed you, saying that Alireza won the first two games and then Magnus drew the third one, but it was actually that Magnus won the third one and the fourth game ended in a draw. But yeah, brilliant stuff by both of them. Hope you enjoyed it and hope you were able to solve both of these ideas. So yeah, really hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Jeremy Aniftos, Carl Weinberg, Rajeshri Chowdhury, Brian Stone, and David Gasparian for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.